Mike Schaefer from Husker247. Used to throw a mean pitch back in the day. Now that the Yankees are allowing people to have facial hair coming out of retirement, thinking about it?
It's a possibility. I'm sure I could serve up a home run to John Kenzie Noel just as easily as one of their bullpen pitchers did.
When's the last time you threw a baseball?
Oh, great question.
Like, actually attempted to throw a baseball. I think it was a couple years ago. I was trying to get the arm loose for something or another. I mean, I actually putting something on a throw. It was probably like 7 years ago in a softball game, trying to hit the relay throw from short right to the catcher, put everything on it, and then my arm just like dangled afterwards, and that was kind of the end of it.
Yeah. Keep going. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, I've had labrum surgery. I didn't really rehab it particularly great, and my arm has never really been the same. And so it's like it's good for one or two, put everything you have on it, throw, and then it's just gonna hurt for like a week.
If we put you on
and everything I have on it now has just gone from like mid 80s to 70s to, I'd be excited if I could still touch 71. I don't know if I can. Okay. I don't know if I have that in me anymore.
Fair enough. I mean, I also have a torn labrum, so I guess we have that in common, labrum bros. I bet you versus me, I think it would be I think we would be 3 miles apart from each other. I still think I can touch 72. I think you could get to 75 maybe if you put those hips into it.
You're 15 years younger or whatever it is. So I would hope that your arm could still get to the 70s in your early 20s and your youth.
I do have the body of a 55-year-old man, though. I've been put through the ringer, so that's definitely to be determined. What is to be determined is kind of when we were talking about it earlier, and I want to get your perspective on it. The hype is kind of building up for Nebraska football and everything that's been happening, the transfer portal, the coaches that they've gotten. But we were talking about the schedule earlier today. If you had to put a number on it, how many night games do you think Nebraska football will end up having this year?
Home and away, or just home?
Just home.
People get
home
really
night games.
Okay. All right. Without like completely going through the schedule in my head, I would just say you set the over under at 2.5. I think that's like a good number. I'd probably say 2 if I had to guess.
Okay. People love night games around here. They love winners. They love night games. If you're looking at Sam's story about scan tickets, Schaefer.
Well, yeah. I mean, night games allow for more people to get to Lincoln in a timely fashion or to make an entire day of it. The 11 a.m. kick obviously cuts down on that. I just, without really kind of thinking too hard on the schedule, I don't know that there's just like a lot of games that just pop in Lincoln next year as like, oh, this is something that will definitely appear at 6:30 or 7 o'clock. And then their TV partners, like then, like your best games are going to be elevated into that noon window or into the 3 o'clock, 2:30. So it's almost like you end up with a night game if you're sort of an also ran Big Ten game or if you're like a Peacock special. So it's like harder to get to the night games with quality opponents than it is if Nebraska's just kind of put in a blow-off time spot.
Hey, on your message board at Husker247, what's the narrative on E.J. Barthel? And then what should be the narrative on E.J. Barthel as a running back coach at Nebraska, now with a new deal going into his third year?
I think the narrative is just based on whoever the opinion holder is that's doing the talking. I mean, I think in part because I view it as a very unfinished conversation. It makes it really hard to go to one corner or the other and just stand there and never be willing to move from it. I mean, I think there's still a lot to be learned about his ability as a recruiter. I don't think he's been particularly strong in terms of bringing in talent, but he hasn't been a zero. And then on top of it, if Jamarian Parker is pretty good, that's a guy that he would be lined up with. If Quint Ives trades in on all the enthusiasm that Nebraska staff seems to have for him, that could be someone that he should get credit for because he went to he went to the staff early, and that was a guy he really wanted to bring with to Nebraska, back when he first got here in 2022. So I think the recruiting piece of it for me is really hard to square up. I think it's very incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
The on-field coaching piece, it's also difficult because Nebraska's best running back has been a guy that's come from further down the depth chart 2 years in a row. And it's the same guy. So when people want to give EJ Barthel credit for Johnson's play, do you also have to ding him for not recognizing that Emmett Johnson was going to be the best running back that Nebraska would have, or the best option that Nebraska would have, or that it would take Dana Holgerson to get here for that to really sort of emerge at the end? So it's like all things. We want to isolate and have these conversations as if there isn't a million other factors involved in it. But it is notable, at least, that it seems Texas was very interested in EJ Barthel. He's had interviews and options elsewhere. But if you were like, hey, Mike, rank all the coaches on Nebraska's staff, I wouldn't put him in the top third. We'll put it that way.
In terms of the running back position, why don't you think there's been as big of an investment in terms of just recruiting and trying to, I know they got Dante Dowdell, so you can look to that. But if you look comparatively toward the entirety of the other roster, they've definitely put more money and effort into other positions. Do you think there's a reason as to why that may be?
Well, they've put effort into running backs. They just haven't gotten it. They would love to have Nathan Frazier, who's at Georgia and might be the most exciting running back in the country, and certainly one of the fastest. They pursued other running backs, and they weren't able to land them. There was the guy who was committed to Nebraska, whose name is escaping me, that ended up bouncing around a couple different
Lacey?
SEC schools. Yes,
Kawan
Lacey. And so, it's not that they haven't attempted or endeavored to get a high quality running back here. They haven't landed one. There's a difference there. I mean, part of why Jamarian Parker is exciting is that was sort of a big win. And then his recruiting ranking kind of slid down a little bit, even though he was running for an average of 11 yards a carry. So I don't know that his high school production would result in moving down in the recruiting rankings, but he sure did at 24/7 Sports for whatever reason. But that was a big recruiting win because Nebraska hadn't to that point gotten one under EJ Barthel. And so I don't know that they haven't invested the resources in it. The outcomes haven't gone the way that they would have wanted. They certainly have chased top-end running backs, and they're doing it again for 26 with this Stephen Walker out of Missouri. I believe he's Raymore Peculiar.
Yep.
If I have it correct. He's a guy that they would love to get locked in here. And so they're certainly, I think they would love to have better running backs. They just haven't been able to go out and land them. And in the past, and it could still be an issue now, in the past, they haven't identified ones that were going to be good fits in Big Ten play either. And so that's not just this staff. I mean, that's the last decade. I mean, in Nebraska, aside from the 1 year with Ozigbo and Dedrick Mills, I thought was pretty good, but was underutilized at times. Otherwise, Nebraska really had a struggle finding running backs that fit and can play well in the Big Ten.
Okay, so let's do this. And there's another player out of St. Louis called named Jordan Taylor, who also is high in Nebraska that they've offered. But I think they only have 12 offers out to running backs. Do you think as we move towards NFL light in the college level, that how the NFL treats running backs, unless they're Saquon Barkley, that we will see more college programs go with the NFL model on maybe their allotment for revenue sharing goes more to a wide receiver than a running back? I mean, do you think we'll start to see similarities on how an NFL team runs their 53-man roster with allocation of spots on a roster position group to now college programs that have 105, but also are in a little bit of, hey, we got to allot this amount of money or this number of scholarships?
It's tough though, right? Because let's look at some of these college football playoff teams. You had Judkins and Henderson on the same team at Ohio State. Love was a huge part of Notre Dame and their success in the college football playoff. I mentioned Frazier, and Georgia had another great running back as well. Texas had good running game and good running backs too. Cam Scatteraboo was a big part of things. Penn State needed to run the football because
Mhm.
they couldn't let Drew Howler just throw to the tight end Warren on every play, though they certainly tried.
Yeah.
And then Ashton Jenkins. So it's tough because, yes, you want to get into the idea where if you were assigning values per positions, tackles, quarterbacks, defensive backs, and wide receivers, pass rushers, those are all really, really valuable. But in the college game, I still think a running back is hugely important. I don't think you're going to get this diminished attitude. And frankly, in the NFL, we're coming off of a year where it's a running back resurgence with what we saw from Derrick Henry, with what we saw from Saquon Barkley. Josh Jacobs was terrific for the Packers. So, like these guys left in free agency, and it's hard to say that any of the teams in the Titans, Raiders, and Giants, they wouldn't have been better served at least trying to keep those guys or that they weren't better teams with them. And so I still think there's a ton of value in running back play. And I think, sometimes when we go through this, why has Nebraska not done as well in the last decade? I think I look at running back and you haven't had a real answer there. You haven't had anything that's been built. You don't have a guy that can go, make life easier for you by ripping off a 35-yard touchdown run that then you don't have to try to plod the 35 yards or you don't have to set up for a field goal or whatever it is. I mean, some of it to me is self-explanatory. Like you haven't had a playmaker at that position. It shouldn't be hard to figure out why offense is that difficult for you when you haven't had a guy who can go and get things done. Now, can Emmett Johnson be that? Maybe. I think we're elevating to a degree what he's done because it seems so scarce around these parts. That's not to take anything
Great
away from him,
observation.
but I need to see a lot more before I'm going to start talking about Emmett Johnson in the way that we used to talk about Nebraska running back.
That's absolutely great statement. Couldn't agree with you more, Mike. I want to go now to kind of the current things that are happening. Mat drills, winter workouts are definitely on their way. Is there anything you're hearing in terms of maybe stuff they might be doing differently or guys who are standing out early on in their conditioning program?
No, it's been pretty quiet. And I'll be honest, I haven't thrown a lot of focus into kind of what the early scuttlebutt of the workouts is. This is sort of the time of year Nebraska's coaches are out and they're getting back into the office here this past week, and they've taken some vacation time here. February has become, I think, the slowest month in the entire calendar year for college football, and so I think that's just kind of reflected with what's going on. And they're obviously they're going to work and they're trying to get prepared for when spring practices start. I think at the end of March, and so they're going to be going through the mat drills and they're going to have the workouts, and we'll see. I thought one of the interesting things last year is that they would release those sort of weekly kind of who was the leaders and all of it, and it didn't. It's one of those where it's this off-season conversation, but then it didn't really matter in terms of what the picture looked like when the season came around. So we'll see. I'm always really curious about who the kind of team leaders emerge in these situations. You've had Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker and Ben Scott and Bryce Benhart is sort of your guys in the trenches the last few years. Who's sort of stepping up to replace that? Like who is the leader of the offensive line? Is it Rocco Spindler, who just got here? Is it someone like Justin Evans or Henry Lutovsky, who have been here for a while? Defensively, do you have somebody like that? Could it be an Elijah Judy, who'd be one of the oldest in the room, but he hasn't played as much? Is it a Van Poppel who redshirted last year? I think I'm more curious about those types of things, which we tend to learn the closer you get to spring ball. And again, maybe there's some real value in it. Maybe there's not. But I think it's always important to know who the emotional leaders and the vocal leaders are in your locker room, because I think that can be kind of telling about a football program.
Hey, opening weekend of college baseball, good series this weekend at Louisiana as McConaughey pitches tonight. Most encouraging thing through the 4 games to open up the week and the most meh?
Well, I mean, you would have liked to have finished by putting up it's just one of those things in baseball. You score 13 runs the day before, and then the next day it's hard to scratch anything out, and that's a credit to Grand Canyon. But you would have liked to have seen Nebraska end that thing on a little bit of higher note. 2-2, I thought was a good start. The takeaway I have is that they came in and they were able to compete sort of right away. I mean, we've had years where it feels like it takes Nebraska baseball the first 2 weekends to kind of look like a team that's finally seen live pitching and can perform against some of the better teams that are on the non-conference schedule. And they were able to jump into it. It started ugly on Friday, but they jumped right into it with that game on Saturday against Vanderbilt. And the big thing I have is if I just want to see what it looks like if you get locked in Gabe Swanson for an entire year. Like if you get the version of the guy who showed up in the Big Ten tournament and the regionals, could you have him for an entire season? That could be a really special player, and Nebraska could be an incredibly dangerous offense with their ability to get on base in front of him, and him being a potential RBI machine. So that's kind of one of those things. I hope he gets off into a kind of a torrid start, because when Gabe Swanson is locked in, it makes the entire sport that much more fun to watch and listen to.
Any confidence loss after the Penn State debacle for Nebraska basketball?
Not really.
Okay.
I think this on a couple shows. I said this on a podcast yesterday. I think we are guilty of trying to turn every sport into football, where we overreact to every single result.
Yeah.
And in a 31-game season that is college basketball, they had an absolute clunker against Penn State. And you know what happened the next day? Ohio State got absolutely smacked by Northwestern at home, because it's college basketball. It's the Big Ten. Every game is tough. If you're off by a little bit, you're going to get your ass kicked. And Nebraska did out in State College. So I don't have any reason to sound the alarms. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they come home and they beat Michigan on Monday. I still think this is an NCAA tournament team. And I think we don't need to pretend like the sky is falling because they lost again.
I like that. I will see you on the floor after we storm it against Michigan on Monday night.
I don't storm. That's not for me. That's for the youth, for the people that are, wanting to be young.
You and me both.
I'll just sit quietly in my seat and wait for things to clear out so I can exit, and probably send a photo on Twitter of the people on the floor and just say basketball state or something, really unique.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoy the basketball tomorrow night. I will see you and your lovely wife at Baxter.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Should be a good time. Should be a heck of a game. Summit. Underrated basketball conference year in and year out.
Yes, tomorrow night will be a big game. That'll be a fun game between Omaha and South Dakota. There might be 100 points scored.
Hell yeah.
Hey, looking forward to that.
All right. Thanks.
See you, Mike.
See you guys.
Mike Schaefer from Husker247.